It is a pleasure to be here this morning representing Lutheran Heritage Foundation. Appreciate Pastor Johnson opening the door for this to happen here. I'll explain a little bit more as we go along my relationship with this organization, how it happened. But my primary purpose here this morning is just to introduce you to LHF and the work that it does and some of the challenges that lie ahead. So can we just open with a word of prayer? Father in heaven, we thank you for gathering us together in your name and under the umbrella of your grace. We do pray that you would bless your word this day, that it would reach our hearts in a way that affects our lives, both with the comfort of your gospel and the challenge that lies before us in the spreading of your word. In Jesus' name, amen. So let me just begin with a question. Who knows anything at all about Lutheran Heritage Foundation other than Pastor Johnson? Sylvia? What do you know?
I know that it's an outreach from the Lutheran Church to reach people with catechisms, Bibles, and other Christian literature in their own words so that they can learn it, study it, and come to faith through it.
Good. That's great. Yeah. I was going to say, so the rest of this is just done, whatever Sylvia just said is good. Anybody else? So this presentation is just basically to fill in some of what, around what Sylvia just said. This is an organization that, not really about this. This is an organization that translates, publishes, distributes, and introduces books, not Bibles, but books that have in indigenous languages and throughout the world. So there are two qualifications that the books that Lutheran Heritage Foundation works with. First qualification is it's got to be biblically faithful. It's got to be biblically faithful. And the second qualification is it's got to be solidly Lutheran. And only when it meets those two qualifications does it come up for a project. So as you can imagine, one of the most translated books, published, distributed books is Luther's Small Catechism. This is almost always, not always, but almost always the first move in an area that is being worked, if you will. The second book that is almost as frequently used is this 50 Bible Stories, A Child's Garden of Bible Stories. It's 25 in the Old Testament, 25 in the New Testament. And this is written just for children. But this, along with Luther's Small Catechism, become the two primary books that are translated, published, distributed, introduced. One for everybody in the church, the Small Catechism, to grow in their faith and the understanding of the Scriptures. And the second is for children to do the same, and parents to have a tool in their hands other than the Small Catechism to speak to their children about the faith. This is the map of the world, and this is the place. These are the places where Lutheran Heritage Foundation is doing work, and it's all ongoing. Once a new country opens up, it just stays open because the work continues. I don't know how many countries this is at this point. I do know that there's a new country about to be turned red in Greenland. We actually have a missionary in Greenland who is working with LHF to do some translating work there, and that'll open up a big swath of territory as well. The Lutheran Church, or the Lutheran Heritage Foundation, began where, Pastor Lagutin? Where is this? The Soviet Union. This is in Russia. So this is just a little over 30 years ago. And LCMS pastor named Robert Rahn was a pastor who was working in Russia. And after the fall of communism, there was an urgent need expressed by Christians to have both a Bible and something to study the Bible with in their own language, because under the communist rule, just about all of this was taken away and churches closed, and you know the story. So Pastor Ron worked with other people in Russia to translate both the Bible, and attached in the same volume was Luther's Small Catechism at the end. And these were published, printed, and you can see the distribution that is going on. And it is this kind of distribution system that happens. It's very personal. So it's, here, let me hand you this book kind of system. There's no bookstores, there's no Amazon, none of that. It's a very personal, face-to-face system. This particular work blossomed, and a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth printing was in demand. And from that point, things began to take off in a way that was, I think, unanticipated, and yet just the way the Holy Spirit works. Rather than going into now another place and trying to find a contact and generate some interest and filling that need, once this happened in Russia, neighboring countries began to come to Pastor Ron and say, hey, what can you do for us? And the next country to which the request was came and was filled, what country do we know is right next to Russia? The what?
China?
Nope. You hear about it in the news all the time when you hear about Russia. The Ukraine. Very contemporary stuff, even though this is 30 years old now. The Lutheran Church in Ukraine was a vibrant church, and comes to Pastor Ron, what can you do for us? And the first book that they asked for is something for our children, and that's where the Garden stories, Bible stories for children, sort of takes its initial foothold. Following that, the Small Catechism. Following that, then, are resources for pastors. And so pastors who don't have equipment in their own language to work with are limited in bringing in the church at large to their Bible studies, to their sermons. You need help to do that. So they begin to translate commentaries. The Book of Concord is a big one, so not just the Small Catechism. And so this begins to blossom and flourish. These children are holding their children's book that have been translated into the Ukrainian language. Finland, the country of Finland, is another interesting story as to just how this work has progressed and moved forward. The church in Finland is a state Lutheran church, which means that when you get your driver's license, for instance, you have to check on your driver's license, are you Christian, are you Muslim, are you no church? You have to, and that goes on your official identification. And what that means is if you say you're a Christian, you pay taxes now to the church that you indicate you are a member of. And in Finland, the state church is the Lutheran Church. So if you indicate that you are Protestant, you pay taxes now to the state church, and the state church pays congregations and pastors and so forth. And it just so happens that the state church in Finland is quite liberal. And so within now Finland, there is a conservative Lutheran church body that is not supported by the state whatsoever, and in fact gets a lot of pushback from the state. And so this is, this is Pastor Pavola, who is the bishop of the, I don't remember the name, but the Conservative Lutheran Church in Finland. And there is a woman there who is a university professor in Finland. She is also a member of his church. Her husband is a pastor, and she wrote this book called Male and Female, He Created Them. And it simply states the biblical testimony to creation of male and female. And Lutheran Heritage Foundation published this book, printed it, and has distributed it in Finland. The consequence, and maybe you've read about this or heard about this in the news, but the consequence is that both Reverend Pavola, who has promoted it, and the author is Pavi Razanen, have been brought up on charges of hate crimes. And they have been set on trial before the National Assembly, something like our Supreme Court. And in the first go-round, they've been convicted as innocent. And now they thought after 5 years of going through this that they were good to go, free. No, it is being appealed now. The consequence of all of this is that this book is in such great demand in Finland and all of Scandinavia just because of the publicity of this trial. And now it is being published in all kinds of languages all over the world, all by Lutheran Heritage Foundation, and all because of what took place in Finland. And it has become, even in the US now, a very popular product that conservative Christian churches, more than just Lutheran, want to have. And that's the way this sort of works. The project that is just brand new, that is getting really some of the most excitement in the Lutheran Heritage Foundation world today is we have just now produced the Lutheran Service Book. This is a hymnal in Spanish. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod came to Lutheran Heritage Foundation and said, you know, one of our great needs is we've got to supply an order of service and a hymnal to Spanish-speaking people, and Concordia Publishing House is not equipped to do that. Lutheran Heritage Foundation is, would you lead the way? So in conjunction with Lutheran Heritage, with Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, Lutheran Heritage Foundation has translated, published, and is now in the process, just in the last 2 months, of distributing the Lutheran Service Book in Spanish. You can see it's quite a bit bigger than our current hymnal is. It's got more hymns in it, but it has all 5 of the divine services that we use. It has both the 2 morning services, the 2 evening services, the service of confession and absolution. It is absolutely a foundational book for the Lutheran Church throughout the world to now base its worship on, that gives it a solid foundation that it just simply has not had. The hymnal is such a critical book in the life of the church that weak hymnals produce weak theology. Strong hymnals reinforce strong theology, and the 2 work hand in hand. Somebody has once said, and I think that it's true, that among many of these liberal church bodies in the world, in the US, the only saving hope that some of these churches have is that they're using these old hymnals that they used to use, which were quite faithful. And the hymnody that the congregation sings reinforces, strengthens, teaches the faith almost, I hate to say this, better than the preaching. Right? And that's what this promises to do. Right now, the demand for this hymnal is so great because all of South America is asking for it. How much Spanish-speaking population do we have just in the U.S.? Congregations in the U.S. are saying, give it to us, give it to us. Right now, this is the big project that needs financial support to meet the demand. Pastor?
You weren't referring to here at St. John's when you said the hymnal almost does a better job than the past.
Of course not. No.
Okay.
Of course not. Yeah.
Hymns in my head, and I cannot repeat your sermon.
Oh, thank you, Sylvia.
This is our president, Matt Harrison, getting silly because he's so excited about this new project. From here, just all kinds of different books on the table as you leave. There's just a two-page publication that changes almost every 3 or 4 months that lists every single one of the books Lutheran Heritage Foundation is actively publishing, distributing, and in what language and in what country. 1,274 of these volumes, and for all kinds of different purposes. And this is Spanish-speaking Small Catechism, Book of Concord. This is the Book of Concord in the Mandarin language being used in mainland China and in Taiwan. In Taiwan, there's a little easier access to church life. In the mainland, it's sort of underground, and they want something in their language. We take for granted, because of the country we live in, that if you want a book, you simply choose which publisher, and publishers come out of the woodwork to print a good book, distribute it. Well, in many countries, these things just simply do not exist. And so somebody either has to do this from the outside, or just simply you don't get anything in your language. You've got to know a second language to translate then back into your native language. This is Kenya, and they're using the Child's Garden of Bible Stories. This is Ethiopia. This is an amazing new product that I was actually fortunate, blessed to be a part of. This is called God's Word for You, and it's actually geared, the Bible stories are geared for teenagers. And there are great illustrations, comic book style illustrations, along with the Bible stories. I was part of the, because I know the translator, Reverend Ted Nathalang, he asked me to be a part of the team that proofread it, looked for any doctrinal errors, so forth. And so I'm kind of really familiar with this one. This one is not yet, it's so new, it's not yet been translated into another language. It's the English that is in demand in so many places, especially Southeast Asia, but that's the next step. It's not often that somebody from Lutheran Heritage Foundation writes the book in English and then gets it translated. Usually, it's already a product out there that then gets translated. This is a little different story. This is the story of the Sudan church, and this is helpful for me just to sort of fill in a little bit of the blank as to just how this work that Lutheran Heritage does has progressed. It is one thing to translate a book, find a publishing house then that can do a good job at actually printing it, binding it, producing it en masse. What happens next is you've got to get it from the publishing house, which for Lutheran Heritage Foundation up to just 6 months ago, for the last 30 years, all of the printing, publishing, and distributing has been done out of Bangkok, Thailand. Ted Nathalang, who's our translator there, had this contact. They do a great job, and they're cheap. All right, they can do it cheaply. As of 6 months ago, we now have a publishing house in South Africa. And the only reason that happened is because of COVID and all of the shipping problems that took place. We've got loads of books still on containers in the ocean, just because there's no ports so equipped to unload them. So we need something a little bit more diverse. So you've got to do all of that. Then you've got to distribute it. Somehow it doesn't just get from the port into the hands of church bodies that need it. So that is an entire network that Lutheran Heritage Foundation has to develop and build. And then once you get it into the hands of people, you've got to actually say, this is what this book is all about, and say. And you've got to introduce it, and you've got to set all that up. And then what happens is people get it and read it, and they say, wow, we're not Lutheran, but this actually says what we believe better than anything that our church body has, or that I've ever read, or that we've ever had to share the gospel with. What does it take to become Lutheran? Now, Lutheran Heritage Foundation has got this challenge. Now, suddenly, we're in the business of training pastors how to be Lutheran pastors. And so seminaries are necessary. Now, what I've just told you is the story of what's going on in South Sudan, where there's never been Lutherans, let alone a Lutheran church. Now there is a Lutheran church body in South Sudan that is in fellowship with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and that sends its pastors to South Sudan seminary, where American pastors, seminary profs go and teach seminary courses. It's an amazing thing. And all of this is from nothing that started with a small catechism that was translated. Yes?
The translators that translate all, are they hired or are they on staff?
It's a good question. So the question is, the translators that do the translating, are they hired? Are they on staff? Here's how this works, and it is a fascinating process. We have, what I've told you so far is about the Lutheran Heritage Foundation. Operates with a paid staff of 12 people. 8 of them are in Macomb, Michigan, doing a lot of the support work. The rest of them, 5 of them, are in continents, and they are called translators. Now, the one I'm most familiar with, because I worked closely with him, is Reverend Ted Nathalang in Southeast Asia. So here's how this works. Ted Nathalang is a native Thai person. He is now a U.S. citizen. His wife is still a Thai citizen. He is from Thailand. He's born and raised in Thailand. He now lives in St. Louis. He works for Lutheran Heritage Foundation full-time in Southeast Asia, which is a huge swath of territory. Includes China, Indonesia, Australia. He will identify a need. Small catechism is usually the first. He will find someone who knows English. He'll give them an English small catechism and say, translate this into Thai, which is a huge challenge. And it's a multifaceted challenge simply because, I mean, in Thailand alone, there are 20 different dialects. Each dialect is different. So just because you know Thai doesn't mean you know that Thai that this region knows. So you're going to do it in a dialect. Then what happens is he gives the translation back to Ted. Ted then gives it to another person who knows Thai, but who also knows English. And the other person translates it back into English. And only when the English that was translated from the English into Thai matches the original English do we have a product that we're confident we're ready to print and publish. And even that, first editions are always small. Because no matter how carefully you do this, you're going to find errors, you're going to find ways where you could have done it better. Second versions are always much more polished. And then that's where you get into the big the big printing. So that's the way it works. And this is with every single piece. Every single piece.
How many languages did you say? Over 1,000?
There's over 140 different languages that books have been translated into at this point. Lots there. I mean, the more this work progresses, the more the world comes to Lutheran Heritage Foundation and says, do this for us. It's a past day where the Lutheran Heritage Foundation goes out and says, let me see if I can get you interested in what we do. Now it's, can we keep up with the demand? So this is the way it works, and this is an example. So can books really make a difference? This is the story that I've just tried to relate. I'll try to make it a little more personal at this point and give you my story. So in 2008, I had the wonderful privilege of being asked to go to Southeast Asia, Ted Nathalang, a roundabout story, but asked if I would be willing to go to Bangkok, Thailand for 7 days, and then to Phnom Penh, Cambodia for 7 days, because in Thailand and in Cambodia, the small catechism had been translated into both Thai and the Baha language in Cambodia. And just like I described, the process took off. So where there was no Lutheran church in either country, there now is a Lutheran church of about 25 congregations in Thailand and a Lutheran church in Cambodia that is exploding. I think there's about 40 congregations in Cambodia at this point. None of which there was no Lutheran church presence whatsoever. Small catechism led to more books. Now we need training to become Lutherans. The Lutheran Institute of Southeast Asia was founded by Ted Nathalang and one other missionary, Jeff Ehlers. And pastors from around the country come in. They do classes. I was asked to do the class called God and Creation, which is basically what does Genesis 1, 2, and 3 teach? And so you get into not only the doctrine of creation, but the doctrine of the Trinity, the Word that preaches everything into existence becoming flesh, which opens up the doctrine of the second person, the Holy Spirit who's dwelling over. Now you've got this, all of the Bible in the first 3 chapters, and it was really the place where it took me 1 year to get ready for this, where I was just over my head in Genesis 1 through 3 and fell in love with it, and haven't fallen out of love with it yet. But this is how it happened. So I go over and spend a week in Thailand, a translator next to me who translates everything, which is a real challenge because he's got to understand English. English doesn't always translate well. I'll say something dead serious. He'll translate it. Everybody breaks out laughing. And I'm looking and saying, I don't think you got that right. Then I move over to Phnom Penh, Cambodia, do the exact same thing with a class that's twice the size. This was my class in Cambodia. Got a chance to get to know the folks there and do some sightseeing. Spent 2 days touring the killing fields where the Khmer Rouge carried out their genocide and understood a little bit more some of the background that these folks come with. What is the youngest average age country in the world today? Cambodia. And it's because the Khmer Rouge in 1972, 73 wiped out all of the older people. It was a brutal thing, online with the Holocaust. Now it's an incredibly young country, and it's young people who are hearing the gospel and saying, there's a word of hope that we haven't heard in a long, long time, that we want to hear more of. So from Cambodia, this is the worship service in one of the churches in Cambodia, and I show this slide because this is a marvelous story. In Cambodia, the translator was actually one of the pastors who knew English. He took a break. He had to go somewhere. He brought in a friend who was Christian. I think he was Presbyterian. But anyway, he could translate. And so this fella in the light blue shirt standing there right in the middle, Matthew, he's actually my translator for the second half of my time in Cambodia. And we're talking about baptism, which flows naturally out of the whole creation coming out of water. And by the time we're done talking about baptism, he comes to me and he says, that's what I believe, and that makes more sense than anything I've heard before. And he is now one of the pastors in training in the Lutheran Church in Cambodia. It's just marvelous the way this stuff works. One day we took this ride to hell, out to the border of Vietnam to a little village there that it could have been more than 60 miles. It took us like 5 hours to get there because of the roads the way they are. And visited a village that was conducting VBS for one of the congregations out there. And this is Vacation Bible School Cambodian style. The deaconess, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, is the teacher. And what book is she using to teach VBS with? A Child's Garden of Bible Stories translated into the Khmer language for Cambodian children to understand, Sunday school teachers, deaconesses to use with children. That's the story of Lutheran Heritage Foundation. It has developed now to the point that Lutheran Heritage Foundation is not just as active, but getting active in a way that we haven't seen in a long time here in the U.S. As more and more immigrants come into this country, more and more U.S. congregations are saying, you got to help us. You got to help us feed these folks who don't understand English. What can Lutheran Heritage Foundation do for us? And so Spanish is a big thing just here in our own backyard. The Hmong congregation down the street, I've been working with their pastor just a little bit to help equip them with what we have to offer in the Hmong language. They already have and use a lot, he says. Luther's Small Catechism and A Child's Garden of Bible Stories in the White Hmong dialect. And here again, there's a Blue Hmong dialect and a White Hmong dialect, and one doesn't hear the other. What they don't have is a Bible. And so I'm trying to get the pastor here in connection with Ted Nathalang to see if maybe there is an opportunity to work. This is how the translation work goes. You find somebody who does know this particular language. But it's that kind of work that's now moving into the U.S. Pastor Johnson, you've had contact with Lutheran Heritage Foundation in Haiti. How did that work for you?
Because I wanted to bring something that would be in their native language, which is Creole, version of French. So I took Lutheran Heritage Foundation, sent me free of charge a whole box of books for children. And I was able to take those down into Haiti.
Good. And that's precisely how it works a lot in the U.S. We're going overseas. What can you give us to take that these folks can actually use? And amongst Lutherans, Lutheran Heritage Foundation is your only option. And I can tell you that among other church bodies, there is no such thing like it. And so other church bodies come to Lutheran Heritage Foundation. Here's one of the great things that's... so I didn't finish my story. 2010, 2 years later, Ted said, we're ready to introduce the Small Catechism now in Indonesia. And we need your help to introduce it. I've got it translated, published, and I'm ready to distribute it, but I can't just hand it out. You got to tell these people what it's about. So myself and Alan Taylor, good friends from a seminary from Texas, the two of us go to Indonesia through Bangkok, through a lot of other places. And Lutheran Heritage Foundation has, Ted Nathalang has set up seminars, 5-day seminars in 5 different places in Indonesia, in the island of Sumatra, not Jakarta. So in Sumatra, there's an interesting background where it is 50% Muslim, 50% Lutheran in Indonesia. How did that happen? Swedish missionary, Nielsen, came down out of Sweden and was the first Christian missionary to proclaim the gospel without getting eaten. This is a very cannibalistic society by its background and history. Nielsen survives, plants the gospel Lutheran style. The Lutheran church grows. Nielsen dies. No one is there really to fill in the pieces, to support it, but the church grows. To this day, the Lutheran church is a huge church, just like in America, with several different Lutheran church bodies. However, if you can believe this, they do not have and haven't had for over 30 years Luther's Small Catechism. And so when Ted Nathalang shows up and says, we could make this happen, they say, you mean we could have Luther's Small Catechism? And he says, you're Lutheran, right? And they say, yeah, but we don't know anything about it. And so you might as well just put it on a non-denominational heading on it. They get Luther's Small Catechism, but they need someone to say, this is what it says. And so that's the work that we did in 5 different places. And we did this in seminaries. So these are Lutheran professors, Lutheran seminaries. With Lutheran students, we did this in collections of Lutheran pastors that came in. Some of these meetings were over 150 pastors. Spent a week on the island of Nias, which was just off the coast of Sumatra, one of those islands that got wiped out in the tsunami. Rebuilt. There's a Lutheran seminary there that wants to be confessional, conservative, introduced Luther's small catechism, and we go back home. 2 years later, Ted says, we got another project, and it's this one, and this is a book called The Fundamentals of the Christian, The Introduction to Christian Doctrine. And this is by Edward Kahler, who's an old dead German Lutheran. And this just flushes out the small catechism even more. He says, we've got this ready to go, and they want it, but we've got to introduce it. We go back over, and between Alan and I, we share the chapters. This is a month-long visit, moving through Indonesia, and it's just amazing to see what happens, and they are so grateful to have something in their language that they can use to teach their people, for people themselves to grow in the faith. This is how I got involved in all of this after retirement, moving here. My goal was to find a big congregation to join where I could hide. And it didn't work. So Lutheran Heritage Foundation gave me a call, said, we know your background, we know where you are. We have no one in the Southeast District that has any experience with this. Would you? And I said, man, I'd be delighted. I would be delighted, because I love this organization. And it gets me off Pastor Johnson's back just a little bit. What I've been doing is just telling this story where I can, in congregations that will let me in. And next Sunday, I'll be at Christ Lutheran Church, downtown, Hickory. Sunday after that at St. Peter's. 2 Sundays ago, I was at Redeemer Lutheran in Burlington, which is just outside of Greensboro. And I've got a couple of other congregations lined up after that, and that's my goal, just to keep telling the story and sharing the good news. And inviting you to be a part of it. It's with your prayers, with your contributions. None of this happens with any outside funding except for individuals, congregations, LWMLs of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Any other questions before? Well, I guess we're done with that. Any other questions or thoughts?
Have you ever had any problems getting something translated to a language that there may be no written word?
Yeah, so what Darrow just asked is, what do you do in a place where there's no written language? And frankly, to the best of my understanding, that's where we call Lutheran Bible translators, who are experts at taking a spoken language, putting a written vocabulary to it, and then you've got something to work with. And once they do that for the Bible, then we can sort of piggyback off that. But Lutheran Bible translators would have to be the first one in on that particular kind of project. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for your attention and for your invitation to be here.